The role of the wife. The role of the wife is simple. There's only one responsibility the Bible mentions that the wife has, and in one word, it's submission. And to submit means to obey. Colossians chapter 3, verse 18, wives, be subject to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. And in Titus chapter 2, verse 4 and 5, he says, so that they may encourage the young women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be sensible, pure, workers at home, kind, being subject to their own husbands, so that the word of God may not be dishonored. And so the wife is responsible for submission. Because remember, the husband is responsible for sacrificial love, sanctification, spiritual covering, and sacrificial love, headship, sanctification, and spiritual covering. And so for the wife to receive all of that the husband has to give, she has to submit. Submission precedes reception. You have to submit to receive. If there's a cloud of rain pouring out rain, or a cloud pouring out rain, you have to stand under the cloud to receive the rain from the cloud. If you want to receive lectures from a teacher, you have to sit and submit to that teacher. Whoever you want to receive from, you have to submit to. And so if the wife is to receive from the husband, she has to submit to the husband. She has to come under the husband, for the husband, like a cloud, to rain upon her, to rain his headship and his sacrificial love and his sanctification and his spiritual covering. He cannot accomplish any of these things without her submitting. You see that now? So the only responsibility the wife has to the husband is submission. Again, in Colossians 3:18, it says, wives, be subject to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. And why does the wife have to submit to the husband? Is because Christ, or the church rather, is submitted to Christ. Remember the law of field mimicry. Whatever responsibility the church has is the responsibility that the wife has, and that is simply submission. The only responsibility we have to Christ as a wife is to submit to him, is to obey him. He has to sanctify us. He has to be our head. He has to be our covering. And he has to love us sacrificially. That is the role of the wife. It is submission. It is submission. And this is the reason for which when a spiritual man, I should say, is getting married, he's not looking for so much in the wife, as it were. All he's really looking for is a woman that fears the Lord. Because if she fears God, she'll fear the husband. And when I say fear, you know what I mean to say that. I mean reverence, respect. If she's a woman that respects God, which means she has reverence for and submission to God, a woman who submits to God will then submit herself to her husband in obedience to God. That's essentially what the husband is looking for. As far as, well, of course, he might also have some physical. Well, again, it depends on who I'm talking about. If that's why I said a spiritual man. What a spiritual man is looking for. Because there are Christians and there are spiritual Christians, there are carnal Christians. Carnal Christians are going to marry people based on physical appearance and how much they are attracted to the person in the flesh. Unfortunately, marrying somebody based on their physical appearance is like buying a phone based on how it looks and not how it functions. After 5 years, you're going to get used to the appearance of the phone. What you'll be stuck with is the function of the phone, how well it works. In the same way, once you get married to somebody, not that you won't think they're attractive anymore, but you get used to the physical appearance. You've now copulated, you've done everything that you dreamed of doing. And I don't mean to be vulgar, but that's just the reality. If all there was to it, a working marriage was beauty, then the most beautiful woman in the world would not struggle as much as they do with marriage. How many times I don't like to name names all the time, but for this case, how many times has Kim Kardashian been married? How many times has Halle Berry been married? Mariah Carey, all these people that people would consider to be some of the most beautiful women, they struggle in marriage. He would say, if they're so beautiful, why can't men stay with them? Because after they slept with him 500 times, you now have to deal with a human being. After you get past the breast and the face and the thighs and the hips, once you get used to that and you have to deal with a human being, all of a sudden you realize that I don't even like this person. And now all the contention, after maybe the first, second, third, fourth year, after you've done everything sexual and you get past the whole she's so beautiful thing, and you're dealing with an individual person that has a soul, a mind, a will, and an intellect, and you're dealing with a human being with a mindset different from yours, with a vista different from yours, with a paradigm different from yours, and you're butting heads, all of a sudden all the beauty means nothing anymore because you don't like the person. The same way, it'd be the same thing if you bought a phone because of its appearance. And then after you got used to the appearance, you realize that the phone doesn't even work well. The camera doesn't work. When I click on the apps, it doesn't work. I mean, the volume button, you see, now you're actually having to deal with the function of the phone, not the presentation of the phone. Once you get used to the presentation, you have to deal with the function, how it works. And so if you marry somebody based on the presentation, you'll get used to the presentation and be dealing with the function of the person, who the person is as an individual, their character, their virtue, how spiritual they are. Yes, when they were in church, they had presentation, they looked like they were so spiritual. But once you actually got into marriage, you're going to be exposed to how spiritual they really are. I don't mean to go off on a tangent. What I'm trying to say here is that I started off by saying that when a spiritual man is looking for a wife, what he's looking for primarily is a woman that fears the Lord, a woman that's in submission to God. Because if she submits to God, then she'll submit to Him. But a woman, her criteria has to be heavier. See, because the same way when you go to a university, the lecturer doesn't have any standards for the students. The students can come in and be as ignorant as can be. All he needs from the students is their willingness to learn. But it's not different. It's different from the student. The student demands for the teacher to meet a certain criteria to be qualified to teach them. You see, so the student's criterion is very heavy as opposed to the teacher. The teacher just needs one thing: somebody willing to learn. It's the same thing for a husband. A spiritual man is not looking for a woman that's so wise and so intelligent and so because he's coming to develop her. You see, because he is in the role of the person that's giving. He's the giver in the relationship. And so he's not looking so much for I'm not saying it's wrong. He's not going to be like, it's wrong for her to be so wise already or so spiritual already. But it's not as heavy on his priority list for a woman to be so deep in the spirit. No, he just needs a woman willing to learn. He can be deep. She doesn't have to be deep. The same way when you go to school, you can go into the classroom and not know anything. It's not a problem for the lecturer. The lecturer is not even expecting for you to know anything. He needs one thing. He or she needs one thing. Are you willing to learn? That's it. But you as the student, the lecturer has to meet a certain criteria because the lecturer is going to pour into you. And what is poured into you is what you're going to become. A wife has to be much more careful about who she marries because this is the man that's going to be leading you. And if the blind lead the blind, they'll both fall into a ditch. You see, it's okay. Let me say it this way. It's okay for her to be carnal and her to be ignorant and he's spiritual. But then at least she has a willingness to learn and grow. Then for him to be carnal and then she's spiritual, butt of heads. Because either way, the Bible commands her to submit to that God. And if you're submitting to carnality, you're in trouble. If you're submitting to foolishness, you're in trouble. You see that now? The same way if you go to school, if you're going to submit to a lecturer, you have to guarantee that what this guy is going to be teaching me is accurate. You can't just wallop into a classroom and say, oh, any lecturer is a lecturer. No, you're wrong, right? But the lecturer can have that attitude towards the students. It doesn't matter how the students come in because at the end of the day, they're just here to receive. There's no criteria they need to meet to receive. I don't need them to be well developed already. They can come in at a raw state. You see, but he needs to have a certain level of development to be trusted to develop the students. He can't be in a raw state. He can't himself be in a position in which he needs to himself be sitting in the lectures. You see that now. And I'm not saying the husband doesn't have room to improve, but you can be at a point in which you're mature enough to be able to husband a wife effectively. The same way every pilot had their first flight, but they were competent enough to be trusted with the lives of the people on the plane. Every doctor had their first patient. It didn't mean they didn't have anything else to learn, but they knew enough to be trusted with the life of a patient. So I'm not saying before you get married as a man, you have to know everything and be 100. Do you understand what I'm saying now? But you have to be competent enough to be well learned in the school in the spirit, in a school of the spirit enough to be able to trust it, to be able to be trusted to lead a household. You don't have to know everything, but you have to know enough to lead a household. You see, just like as a doctor, every doctor had the first patient. They didn't know everything. They had more to learn still, but they knew enough to be trusted with a patient. Does that make it? Just wanted to mention that as well. But yes, the role of the wife is